Part 1. They say whispers of my clan still echo in the bamboo groves, carried on the wind that sighs through the forgotten peaks of Mount Asama. They say our name, the Kinugawa, is a curse uttered only by the oldest villagers, a tremor in their voices as they recount tales of shadow warriors and a forgotten art. They say much, these villagers, clinging to scraps of legends like embers in a dying fire. But the truth, the bone-deep, blood-soaked truth, belongs only to me. I was the last. The last samurai of the Kinugawa, the last keeper of a legacy shrouded in mist and steeped in the crimson hues of 1,000 sunsets. My earliest memories are not of laughter or lullabies, but of the rasp of steel on steel, the rhythmic thud of wooden staffs against straw dummies, the hushed chanting of ancient kata under a sky bleeding into dusk. Our training ground, a secluded plateau nestled high in the mountains, was our world. The crisp mountain air, thin and biting, filled our lungs, strengthening us, honing us into instruments of precision. The sun, a distant, watchful eye, traced our movements as we danced with shadows, our swords, extensions of our very being. We were raised on a diet of discipline and devotion, molded by the unyielding hand of tradition. Weakness, even a flicker of it, was anathema. Compassion, a luxury we could not afford. We were the Kinugawa, and our only purpose was to serve, to protect, a purpose etched into our souls from the moment we drew our first breath. Our history, a tapestry woven from myth and reality, spoke of a lineage stretching back centuries, to a time when the mountains themselves were young. We were protectors, guardians of a sacred balance, our skills passed down through generations, honed to an almost supernatural sharpness. We were the shield against the darkness that lurked in the valleys below, the silent sentinels against the encroaching chaos. Our techniques, shrouded in secrecy, were unlike anything known to the outside world. We moved like phantoms, striking with the speed and precision of vipers, our swords whispering through the air, leaving only silence in their wake. Our very existence was a closely guarded secret, known only to a select few, their lips sealed by oaths older than the stones upon which we trained. The world beyond the mountains was a distant murmur, a faint echo that barely reached our secluded sanctuary. We knew of emperors and shoguns, of shifting alliances and bloody power struggles, but these were matters of little consequence to us. Our world was the mountain, our allegiance to the ancient pact that bound us to its protection. We were apart, separate, a hidden current flowing beneath the turbulent surface of the world. Our lives were measured not in years, but in the rhythmic beat of the training drums, in the whisper of the wind through the bamboo groves, in the silent dance of steel under the watchful eye of the moon. Our training was relentless, unforgiving. Every muscle, every sinew, every fiber of our being was honed to a razor's edge. We learned to anticipate, to react, to move with an instinct that bordered on precognition. We were taught to endure pain, to embrace it as a crucible that forged our spirit, strengthening our resolve. We were taught to kill not with malice, but with a cold, detached efficiency, understanding that death was simply another aspect of the natural order, a dance between shadow and light. We were not warriors in the conventional sense. We were something more, something other. We were the embodiment of a fading tradition, the last remnants of a dying breed. We were the Kinugawa, and the weight of that legacy rested heavily upon our shoulders. We carried it with a grim determination, a silent acceptance of our destiny, knowing that our path was one of sacrifice, of solitude, of a life lived in the shadows, forever bound to the secrets of the mountain and the whispers of the wind. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan, Part 2 of 25. The whispers continued, a rustling of dead leaves skittering across the tatami mats of my ancestral home. They were always there, just beneath the threshold of audible sound, weaving themselves into the fabric of the silence. I knew, with a chilling certainty, they were the voices of the Kinoshita, the forgotten clan, clawing their way back from the abyss of oblivion. Days bled into weeks, each one a slow descent into the uncanny valley of my own sanity. The katana, my family's heirloom, hummed with a low, persistent thrum, like a trapped insect desperate for release. I kept it close, strapped to my back, a cold comfort against the growing unease. The ancient scrolls I'd discovered, detailing the Kinoshita's forbidden rituals and their pact with something, two coals, remained locked in the iron-bound chest. I dared not open it again, fearing the knowledge within would shatter the fragile remnants of my peace. The village, once bustling with life, now felt deserted. The few remaining villagers avoided my gaze, their faces etched with a fear that mirrored my own. They spoke in hushed tones, their words carried on the wind, like the whispers in my home. "Cursed," they'd mutter. "The last Kinoshita is cursed." One night, the whispers escalated into a chilling chorus. I awoke to the sound of chanting, not human, but something guttural, something ancient. It resonated deep within my bones, vibrating with a power that made my teeth ache. I grabbed the katana, the cold steel, a grounding presence against the rising terror. The chanting grew louder, closer. I crept to the window, peering out into the inky blackness. The moon, a sliver in the sky, cast long, distorted shadows across the deserted streets. Then, I saw them. Silhouettes, flickering at the edge of my vision, moving with an unnatural fluidity. They were tall and gaunt, their limbs elongated and twisted, their heads obscured by what looked like tattered shrouds. They were the figures from my nightmares, the forgotten Kinoshita, returned. Paralyzed by fear, I watched as they converged on my home, their chanting intensifying, filling the night with an oppressive dread. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble. The whispers inside the house grew louder, merging with the chanting outside, creating a cacophony of unearthly sound. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had to escape. I had to break free from this cursed place. I grabbed a small pack, stuffing it with dried food and water, and then hesitated. The katana, my only protection, felt heavy in my hand. Could I leave it behind? Could I abandon the last vestige of my family's honor? The chanting reached a fever pitch, the house shuddering violently. The front door splintered, revealing the horrifying figures silhouetted against the moonlight. Their eyes, glowing red embers in the darkness, fixed on me. With a guttural cry, I charged. I slashed at the nearest figure, the katana slicing through the tattered shroud with surprising ease. But there was no flesh and blood beneath, only a swirling black mist that recoiled from the blade. The figure reformed instantly, its red eyes burning with malevolent intent. The others surged forward, their twisted limbs reaching for me. I fought back with the desperation of a cornered animal, the katana a blur of steel in the dimly lit room. But they were too many, their strength unnatural, their movements inhuman. I felt a searing pain as one of their claws raked across my arm, tearing through my kimono and leaving a deep gash. The blood, hot and sticky, ran down my arm, staining the tatami mats a crimson red. The smell, metallic and sharp, filled the air. Driven by a primal instinct for survival, I broke through the encircling figures and fled out the back door, into the night. The chanting pursued me, echoing through the deserted streets. I ran blindly, my lungs burning, the katana clutched tightly in my hand. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to escape the village, escape the cursed Kinoshita. The moon, my only guide, cast long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed around me, mimicking the movements of the figures I knew were still pursuing me. The whispers, now inside my head, mocked my desperate flight. As I stumbled through the dark woods surrounding the village, I realized I wasn't just running from the forgotten clan. I was running from my own heritage, from the dark legacy that bound me to this cursed land. And I knew, with a sinking dread, that no matter how far I ran, I could never truly escape. The whispers, the chanting, the red eyes burning in the darkness. They would follow me, always. They were a part of me now, a part of the last Kinoshita. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 3. The whispers grew louder that night. They slithered through the cracks in the shoji screens, hissed through the rustling bamboo grove outside my window, and coiled around the flickering candle flame. They no longer sounded like wind, but like voices, thin and reedy, chanting in a dialect I didn't recognize, yet understood deep in my marrow. They spoke of blood debts and ancient pacts, of a hunger that could never be sated. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. I sat in the meditative posture of my ancestors, katana across my lap, senses honed to razor sharpness. The old house creaked and groaned around me, a symphony of settling wood and scurrying rats, but beneath it all, I felt the presence, a cold spot in the air that moved with a chilling sentience. Here, dawn broke, gray and heavy with unspoken dread. The whispers retreated with the shadows, but their chill lingered, clinging to the mist that shrouded the mountainside. I ventured out, the worn wooden geta clicking on the stone path leading down to the village. The silence was unnerving. No cheerful calls of merchants, no playful shrieks of children, no rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Just an oppressive stillness, broken only by the caw of a lone crow circling overhead. The village was deserted. Doors hung open, revealing glimpses of abandoned meals and overturned furniture. Clothes still lay draped over drying racks, stiff and damp in the morning air. It was as if the villagers had vanished in the blink of an eye. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. This wasn't the work of bandits. Bandits took valuables, not people. This was something else, something far more sinister. I found old man Hiroshi's sake cup lying overturned in the dirt outside his shop. A single drop of sake clung to the rim, glistening like a tear. Hiroshi, with his booming laugh and endless stories of the mountain spirits, would never leave his precious sake unfinished. Then I saw it. Scrawled on the wall of the tea house, in what looked like dried blood, was a single kanji, ku, ku, to devour. My hand instinctively went to the hilt of my katana. The whispers, the emptiness, the kanji, it all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. The Oni. The legends of the Oni, monstrous ogres that preyed on human flesh, were woven into the very fabric of our clan's history. We were the guardians, the last line of defense against these creatures of darkness, a duty passed down through generations, a duty I had sworn to uphold. I followed the faint trail of disturbed earth and broken branches, the only sign of the villagers' forced departure. It led me deeper into the mountains, towards the forbidden forest, a place shrouded in shadow and whispered tales of unspeakable horrors. The air grew colder, the trees taller and more twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The oppressive silence was broken only by the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth. I found the first body near a small stream, the body of a young boy I recognized as the baker's son. His eyes were wide with terror, his face contorted in a silent scream. There were no marks on his body, no visible wounds, yet his life force had been utterly drained, leaving behind only a hollow shell. The whispers returned, louder now, mocking and triumphant. They danced around me, a swirling vortex of malice, urging me forward, deeper into the heart of the forest. I gripped my katana tighter, steel against my calloused palm, a small comfort against the growing terror. As I pushed deeper into the forest, the evidence of the Oni's passage became more frequent and more gruesome. Torn scraps of clothing, discarded sandals, a single, blood-stained doll clutched in a tiny hand. The air grew heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the sickly sweet smell of decay. Then I saw them, impaled on the branches of a towering cedar tree, like grotesque ornaments, were the bodies of the villagers. Their faces were frozen in expressions of unimaginable agony, their bodies drained of all color, withered and desiccated. And at the foot of the tree, surrounded by a swirling miasma of dark energy, stood a figure. It was taller than any man I had ever seen, its skin a sickly green, its eyes burning with a malevolent red light. 2 massive horns curved from its forehead, and its mouth was filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. It held a still-beating heart in one clawed hand, its other hand dripping with viscous black ichor. The Oni. It turned its burning gaze upon me, a chilling smile spreading across its grotesque face. The whispers reached a crescendo, a symphony of death and despair. I knew then that my duty had arrived. I was the last samurai, and I would face the Oni. The katana sang as I drew it, the polished steel flashing in the dim light of the forest. I was ready to die, but I would take as many of these demons with me as I could. The hunt had begun. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 4. The whispering intensified. It slithered through the bamboo grove, a sibilant chorus just beyond the threshold of comprehension. I tightened my grip on the katana, the cold steel a familiar comfort against the growing unease. The amulet, pulsing faintly against my chest, felt colder than the blade. It had been my father's, passed down through generations, its purpose shrouded in as much mystery as the whispers themselves. He had warned me, just before he disappeared, that the whispers were a harbinger, a prelude to something far worse. I pushed through the thick bamboo stalks, the whispering receding as the grove thinned out. Before me lay a clearing bathed in the ethereal glow of the rising moon. In the center stood the Torii Gate, its vermilion paint peeling like sunburnt skin, a stark contrast to the unsettling serenity of the scene. The gate marked the entrance to what was once our clan's sacred ground, a place now tainted by a silence heavier than the whispering. A chill, deeper than the mountain air, settled on my skin. The amulet pulsed faster, a frantic heartbeat against my chest. This was where I had last seen my father, performing a ritual I didn't understand, his face etched with a fear I'd never witnessed before. He'd told me to stay away, that this place was no longer safe, but filial duty and a burning need for answers had driven me here. I stepped through the Torii Gate, the ground beneath my feet shifting from soft earth to something cold and unyielding. It felt like walking on ice, a thin layer separating me from something vast and frozen beneath. The silence here was absolute, a void that swallowed sound and amplified the pounding of my heart. The clearing opened onto a narrow path leading deeper into the mountains. I followed it, each step hesitant, my senses straining against the suffocating quiet. The path was lined with stone lanterns, their fires long extinguished, replaced by a strange, phosphorescent moss that emitted a sickly green light. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic, like blood, but colder, more ancient. I reached a small, dilapidated shrine. Its wooden walls were warped and rotting, the roof partially collapsed, exposing the dark interior. The whispers returned, louder now, circling me, closing in. I could almost make out words, fragments of a language I didn't understand, yet resonated with a primal dread deep within my soul. I drew my katana, the whisperers seeming to recoil slightly from the glint of steel. The amulet throbbed against my chest, burning now, a searing pain that radiated through my body. I placed my hand on the shrine's entrance, the wood crumbling under my touch. Inside, the air was stagnant and heavy. The phosphorescent moss clung to the walls, casting an eerie green glow that illuminated a small altar at the far end. On it lay a single object, a tarnished bronze mirror. As I approached, the whispering reached a crescendo, morphing into a guttural chanting that vibrated through the shrine. The mirror began to glow, its surface rippling like water. The chanting grew louder, the air colder, the pressure in my chest almost unbearable. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I shouldn't look into the mirror. My father's warnings echoed in my mind, his face contorted in fear, his voice strained, but a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand the horrors that had befallen my clan, compelled me forward. I stood before the mirror, my reflection staring back, pale and drawn. The chanting reached its peak, a deafening roar that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. The surface of the mirror swirled faster, the reflection distorting, twisting into something grotesque. The face in the mirror was no longer mine. It was elongated, skeletal, with eyes that burned with a cold, malevolent light. Its mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. And then it spoke. Its voice was not a voice, but a scraping, grinding sound, like bones rubbing against stone. It spoke in the same guttural language of the chanting, but this time I understood. The last, it rasped, its gaze boring into mine. The vessel. The amulet burned hotter, the pain excruciating. I staggered back, tearing my gaze from the mirror. The chanting ceased abruptly, replaced by a silence that was even more terrifying. The reflection in the mirror returned to normal, my own frightened face staring back. I stumbled out of the shrine, the cold mountain air a welcome relief against the oppressive atmosphere within. I sheathed my katana, my hand shaking. The amulet had cooled, the pulsing subsided, but the fear remained, a cold knot in my stomach. The whispers were gone. The chanting had stopped, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the core that the silence was only a prelude. The thing in the mirror had seen me, it had marked me, and it was coming. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 5. The emaciated figure didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there amidst the swirling dust motes, a grotesque parody of meditation. His silence was more unsettling than any scream. I lowered my katana, the steel whispering against the worn leather of the saya. The air in the abandoned temple, already thick with the scent of decay and mildew, now held something new, something acrid and faintly sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot in the sun. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice echoing through the hollow space. The figure finally stirred, its head tilting upwards with an unnerving slowness. The face that came into view was wrong. The skin was stretched taut over bone, like parchment draped over a skull. Eyes, vacant and milky white, stared straight ahead, seemingly unfocused. Yet I felt a chilling awareness emanating from them, a palpable sense of being observed. He opened his mouth, and a dry, rasping sound emerged, more akin to the rustling of dead leaves than a human voice. "Kenzo, you have returned." My blood ran cold. How did he know my name? The clan had been extinct for generations, its history erased, its existence relegated to whispered legends. Who could possibly know me, know this place? "Who are you?" I repeated, my grip tightening on the katana's hilt. "The keeper, the watcher, the last." The rasping voice continued, each word punctuated by a sickening click from deep within his throat. He raised a skeletal hand, pointing a gnarled finger towards the crumbling altar at the back of the temple. "The truth awaits you there." A primal fear, cold and suffocating, gripped me. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to turn my back on this abomination, and run as far away from this cursed place as possible. Yet, an equally powerful force, a morbid curiosity intertwined with a desperate hope for answers, propelled me forward. Step by hesitant step, I approached the altar, my gaze fixed on the withered figure. He remained motionless, those empty eyes boring into me, filling me with an unshakable dread. The altar itself was a cracked and weathered stone slab, covered in a thick layer of dust. As I drew closer, I noticed intricate carvings etched into the stone, depictions of grotesque figures engaged in some unholy ritual. Symbols I didn't recognize, yet somehow felt intimately familiar, pulsed with a faint internal light. "What is this place?" I whispered, my voice barely audible above the pounding of my heart. "The heart, the source, the beginning," the figure rasped. I reached out a trembling hand and brushed away the dust from the central carving. It depicted a circular symbol, intricate and disturbing, radiating an unsettling energy. As my fingers traced the lines of the symbol, a searing pain shot through my hand, followed by a wave of dizziness. Visions flooded my mind. Flashing images of carnage and despair, of screaming villagers and burning buildings. I saw dark figures, cloaked and masked, performing horrific rituals under a blood-red moon. And then, the most terrifying image of all, a reflection of myself, clad in black armor, a crimson blade dripping with blood. I stumbled back, gasping for breath. The visions were gone, leaving behind a chilling emptiness and a gnawing sense of horror. Could it be true? Could I be connected to these atrocities, to the very darkness that had consumed my clan? What does it mean?" I stammered, my voice choked with fear. The figure let out a low, guttural chuckle, a sound that scraped against my sanity. "You are the inheritor, the vessel, the end." He rose slowly, his joints creaking like rusty hinges. He took a step towards me, then another, his movements jerky and unnatural. "The ritual must be completed," he rasped, extending a skeletal hand towards me. Terror lent me speed. I spun around, sprinting towards the temple entrance, desperate to escape the suffocating presence of this thing. But as I reached the threshold, an invisible force slammed against me, throwing me back into the temple. I landed hard on the stone floor, the air knocked out of my lungs. The figure stood over me, its milky eyes burning into mine. "There is no escape. Kenzo, your destiny awaits." He reached down, his bony fingers closing around my wrist. His touch was like ice, sending a shiver of pure dread through my body. I struggled against his grip, but his strength was unnatural, inhuman. "The blood must be spilled," he hissed, dragging me towards the altar. The carvings on the stone seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. the air thick with a suffocating sense of dread. The figure's grip tightened, his fingers digging into my flesh. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that this was the end. The last samurai of a forgotten clan, about to become a sacrifice to a darkness older than time itself. And the worst part was, a part of me, a dark and hidden part, welcomed it. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 6. The whispers had become a chorus. No longer were they the faint rustling of leaves in a dead forest, but the guttural murmuring of a crowded room, just beyond the veil of hearing. They spoke in the old tongue, the dialect of my ancestors, twisting words of honor and duty into blasphemous pronouncements of my failure. Sleep was a battlefield where I fought shadows armed with the faces of my fallen kin. The village, or what remained of it, felt different. The oppressive stillness I had initially attributed to the massacre now held a different quality. It was pregnant with something unseen, a coiled energy that hummed beneath the surface of the mundane. The air itself seemed thicker, clinging to my skin like a damp shroud. I had begun to meticulously catalog the markings I'd found. The symbols carved into the wood, the strange arrangements of stones I discovered near the riverbed, even the patterns of the scattered debris, all pointed to something ritualistic, something beyond the scope of a simple bandit raid. I started to suspect a darker force at play, something intertwined with the ancient, forgotten practices of our clan. Practices that were forbidden, spoken of only in hushed whispers around crackling fires. Practices meant to appease something. The dogs of the village, usually boisterous and playful, had become withdrawn, their tails tucked low, whimpering in the shadows. One afternoon I found one dead near the outskirts, its eyes milky white, its body contorted into an unnatural position. No marks of violence, no signs of struggle, just an overwhelming sense of wrongness. Driven by a gnawing unease, I returned to the shrine, the one place in the village that still held a flicker of the sacred. The air here was particularly heavy, the whispers almost tangible. The offerings I had left, dried herbs, sake, and a lock of my own hair, remained untouched. This was unusual. Even the forest creatures would normally scavenge such offerings. Inside the shrine, the ancient katana, the blade passed down through generations of my family, pulsed with a faint internal light. I knelt before it, the cold stone floor seeping into my bones. I spoke to the spirits of my ancestors, begging for guidance, for a sign, for anything to break the suffocating silence. My pleas went unanswered. Only the whispers, now louder, more insistent, filled the void. They spoke of a pact, a broken promise, a debt that needed to be paid. They mentioned a name I hadn't heard since childhood, a name that chilled me to the bone. Yamauchi. Yamauchi. The banished one. A sorcerer, they said, who dabbled in forbidden arts, who sought power beyond mortal comprehension. He was cast out from the clan centuries ago, his name erased from our history, his very existence a taboo. The whispers were now weaving a horrifying narrative, a story of betrayal and dark rituals. They claimed Yamauchi had cursed the clan, a curse that lay dormant for generations, waiting for the opportune moment to unleash its wrath. They claimed he had returned, drawn by the weakened state of the village, to collect his due. I gripped the hilt of the katana, the cold steel grounding me in the face of the growing terror. Could it be true? Could Yamauchi, a figure of legend, a ghost story whispered to frightened children, be real? And could he be responsible for the horrors that had befallen my clan? As dusk bled into night, I lit a torch and began searching the village again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. I scoured every corner, every abandoned house, every shadow-drenched alleyway. The whispers followed me, guiding me, mocking me. Then I found it. Behind the largest house in the village, hidden beneath a pile of rubble, was a freshly dug pit. The earth around it was dark and damp, exuding a putrid smell, a smell of decay, and something else. Something ancient and unholy. I dropped to my knees, my heart pounding against my ribs. The whispers reached a crescendo, a cacophony of voices echoing in my skull. I felt a presence behind me, a cold, malevolent energy that made my skin crawl. Slowly, I turned around. Standing in the flickering torchlight was a figure cloaked in shadows. Its face was hidden by a deep hood, but I could feel its gaze, cold and piercing, boring into me. In its gloved hand, it held a wickedly curved dagger, its blade gleaming with an unnatural light. The whispers subsided, replaced by a single, chilling voice, emanating from the hooded figure. "The debt is due, last samurai," the voice rasped, laced with amusement and malice, "and you will pay." The figure lunged. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 7. The whispering started again as I delved deeper into the mountain. It snaked through the pines, a sibilant chorus that rose and fell like the wind, but there was no wind. This time, the words were clearer, fragments of a dialect I hadn't heard since childhood, words of warning, words of longing. They clung to the damp air, chilling me more effectively than the mountain's icy breath. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, the ceiling lost in the oppressive darkness above. A sickly luminescence emanated from the far wall, a pale, pulsating green light that cast dancing shadows, making the stalactites hanging from the ceiling resemble grasping claws. My torchlight felt feeble against this otherworldly glow. In the center of the cavern stood a stone dais, and on it a single katana, its scabbard gleaming with an unnatural sheen. It was unlike any blade I had ever seen. The hilt was crafted from polished obsidian, interwoven with strands of silver that pulsed with the same green light as the cavern wall. The blade itself seemed to absorb the surrounding shadows, its edge a line of absolute darkness. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, desperate plea. Asterisk, take it, claim it, fulfill the prophecy. My hand trembled as I reached for the katana. A part of me screamed in protest, a primal instinct warning me away. This was no ordinary weapon, this was something else. But another part of me, a deeper, more ancient part, felt drawn to it, as if the blade itself was calling to my blood, to the legacy that flowed through my veins. As my fingers brushed against the obsidian hilt, the green light flared, and the cavern walls seemed to dissolve. I was no longer in the mountain. I stood in a vast, desolate plain under a blood-red sky. Twisted, skeletal trees clawed at the horizon, and the ground was littered with the remains of a long-forgotten battle. Broken swords, shattered armor, and bleached bones lay scattered as far as the eye could see. The air was thick with the stench of death and decay, a phantom tang of blood and iron. The whispering voices changed, becoming a chorus of screams, of clashing steel, and the guttural cries of dying men. I saw them then, shadowy figures locked in eternal combat, their movements jerky and unnatural, like puppets on frayed strings. They were my ancestors, the forgotten samurai of the Ashina clan, trapped in this spectral battlefield, reliving their final, desperate stand. A towering figure emerged from the swirling chaos, clad in blackened armor, his face hidden behind a fearsome Oni mask. He carried a katana identical to the one I held, its blade dripping with ethereal blood. He was the betrayer, the one who had broken the clan's oath, the one who had unleashed the curse. His eyes, burning embers of hatred, fixed on me. Asterisk, you are the last. Asterisk, his voice boomed, echoing across the desolate plain. Asterisk, the last to bear the burden, the last to face the consequences. He lunged at me, his blade a blur of darkness. Instinctively, I raised the katana, and our blades met with a deafening clang. The force of the impact sent tremors through my body, but I held my ground. The betrayer's strength was immense, fueled by centuries of rage and regret. We fought, our movements a macabre dance of death under the blood-red sky. The spectral battlefield swirled around us, the screams of the fallen echoing in my ears. The betrayer's attacks were relentless, each blow aimed at severing my connection to the clan, to the very essence of my being. With each parry, each clash of steel, I felt the katana's power surging through me. It was more than just a weapon, it was a conduit, a channel for the rage and sorrow of my ancestors. I could feel their pain, their desperation, their unwavering loyalty to the Ashina clan. I saw an opening in the betrayer's defense, a flicker of hesitation in his burning eyes. With a primal scream, I channeled all the fury of my ancestors, all the weight of their forgotten legacy, into a single, devastating blow. The katana sliced through the betrayer's armor, cleaving him in two. The spectral battlefield dissolved, the screams fading into silence. I was back in the cavern, the green light pulsing softly. The katana in my hand felt warm, almost alive. The whispers were gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace, a feeling of connection to something ancient and powerful. I had taken the blade. I had claimed my legacy. I had taken the first step towards fulfilling the prophecy. But what did the prophecy entail? What was the burden I now carried? And what other horrors awaited me in the heart of this forgotten mountain? The answers, I knew, lay deeper within, shrouded in the darkness and the whispers of the past. And as I stepped forward, the green light pulsed once more, illuminating the path ahead. A path that led not only into the mountain, but into the heart of my clan's forgotten history, and my own terrifying destiny. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 8. The wind howled a mournful dirge through the skeletal remains of the burnt village, mimicking the cries that still echoed in my memory. The acrid smell of smoke clung to the air, a constant reminder of the massacre. The katana in my hand, once gleaming, was now blackened with soot and dried blood, a gruesome testament to my failed duty. I was the last, and I had failed. The old woman's warning, etched in the lines of her weathered face, reverberated through my skull. The blood moon rises. They hunger. Hide, boy, hide. But I hadn't hidden. I had stood defiant, a lone warrior against the tide of shadows that engulfed my clan. Now, the silence that followed the carnage was more terrifying than the screams that preceded it. A heavy, expectant silence that pressed on my eardrums, amplifying the frantic thumping of my heart. Driven by a desperate need to understand, I moved through the ruins. Charred timbers groaned under my feet. The wind stirred the ashes, revealing glimpses of broken pottery, melted metal, and bones. Small bones, too small to be adult. I averted my gaze, bile rising in my throat. The shrine, once a beacon of hope, stood ravaged. Its ornate wooden doors were splintered, hanging precariously from twisted hinges. The sacred scrolls, repositories of our clan's ancient knowledge, were scattered and burned, their wisdom lost forever. I knelt amidst the devastation, a hollow ache in my chest. My hand trembled as I reached out to touch a fragment of a scorched scroll, the faded ink barely visible. A single word remained: Oni. Oni. Demons. The whispers I had dismissed as folklore now held a chilling reality. The shadows I had fought were not men, but something else. Something inhuman. Something that craved not just blood, but the very essence of our clan's spirit. The old woman had also spoken of a hidden passage, a way to escape the valley. Behind the waterfall, she'd gasped, her voice raspy with fear. Find the serpent's eye. The waterfall was a short distance from the village, a thin ribbon of water cascading down a moss-covered cliff face. The spray created a perpetual mist, shrouding the area in an eerie silence. I drew my katana, its familiar weight offering a small measure of comfort. The serpent's eye. What could it be? As I approached the waterfall, a guttural growl echoed from within the mist. My hand tightened around the hilt of my katana. The shadows were still here. They were hunting. I crept closer, my senses on high alert. The growl came again, closer this time, accompanied by the sickening sound of something dragging across the rocks. I peered through the mist, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I saw it, not the shadow I had expected, but something far more disturbing. A grotesque, hunched figure emerged from the mist, its skin a sickly gray, its limbs twisted and gnarled, its eyes, glowing red embers in the dim light, fixed on me with a predatory hunger. Its mouth, a gaping maw filled with razor-sharp teeth, opened in a silent snarl. It was not an Oni, not in the traditional sense. This was something different, something twisted and corrupted, a mockery of human form. It moved with a disturbing fluidity, its limbs contorting at unnatural angles as it stalked towards me. Terror threatened to paralyze me, but the image of my fallen clan spurred me to action. I raised my katana, its blackened blade catching the faint light filtering through the mist. "You will not take another," I hissed, my voice hoarse with grief and rage. The creature let out a blood-curdling shriek, a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of reality. It lunged at me, its claws outstretched, its putrid breath washing over me. The battle was fierce and brutal. The creature was stronger than any man I had ever faced, its movements unpredictable and savage, My katana flashed, deflecting its blows, but the creature's unnatural resilience made it a formidable opponent. I felt its claws tear at my flesh, the pain searing through me, but I fought on, fueled by a desperate need for vengeance. Finally, with a desperate lunge, I plunged my katana deep into the creature's chest. It shrieked again, a sound of pure agony, before collapsing at my feet, its body dissolving into a black, viscous ooze that seeped into the cracks in the rocks. I stood panting, my body aching, my mind reeling. The mist began to clear, revealing a small opening in the cliff face behind the waterfall. Carved into the rock above the opening was the image of a serpent, its single eye gleaming with an unnatural light. The serpent's eye. The hidden passage. The old woman's words echoed in my mind. Escape, boy, survive, and remember. Remember what? Her last words were lost to the chaos of the attack. What was I supposed to remember? What was my purpose now? I sheathed my katana, my gaze fixed on the serpent's eye. Escape, survival, those were my only options now. But as I stepped into the hidden passage, a chilling premonition washed over me. This was not the end. This was just the beginning. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 9. The whispers followed me into the ruined dojo. They slithered through the gaps in the rotting wood, hissed through the tall grass that had invaded the training floor, and echoed in the hollow clang of the rusted katana I'd retrieved from the shrine. They spoke of forgotten rituals, of blood debts, and of the yawning hunger of the earth beneath our feet. I tried to ignore them, focusing on the chipped stone statue of my ancestor, Kenzo, the first swordsman of the clan. His stoic face, even eroded by time and weather, radiated a strength I desperately needed to emulate. He had faced the shadows I now confronted, had stared into the abyss and returned unbroken. But even Kenzo, in the legends whispered by the village elders, had succumbed in the end. My hands, wrapped around the katana's hilt, trembled. The steel felt cold, alien. I hadn't held a sword in what felt like a lifetime, preferring the quiet life of a farmer to the violent legacy of my ancestors. But the quiet life was gone, shattered by the unearthly screams that had ripped through the night, by the disappearance of the villagers, and by the growing certainty that I was all that remained between the world and something unspeakable. I spent the rest of the day sharpening the katana, the rhythmic rasp of the whetstone, a fragile counterpoint to the whispers. The sun bled across the sky, painting the crumbling walls of the dojo in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. As dusk deepened, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, laced with a chilling expectancy. They spoke of a coming darkness, of a ritual that demanded completion. I lit a lantern, its flickering flame casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls, mimicking the movements of unseen figures. I started practicing katas, the ancient forms ingrained in my muscle memory despite years of disuse. The movements were clumsy at first, rusty and hesitant. But as I continued, a familiar focus settled over me, a stillness in the eye of the storm. The whispers receded, replaced by the whoosh of my blade cutting through the air, the thud of my feet on the wooden floor. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, I could survive this. Perhaps I could appease whatever malevolent force was at work, protect what little remained of my world. Then the earth trembled. The lantern swung wildly, casting erratic shadows that stretched and contorted like living things. The whispers returned. A cacophony of voices that clawed at my sanity. A deep, guttural growl echoed from beneath the dojo, a sound that resonated in my bones, a sound that spoke of ancient hunger. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced through my fragile calm. I gripped the katana tighter, my knuckles white. The floor beneath me shifted, cracks appearing in the aged wood. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. Suddenly, the floor beneath the statue of Kenzo gave way. With a sickening crunch of wood and stone, the statue plunged into the darkness below, swallowed by the earth. The growl intensified, followed by a sound that chilled me to the core, the wet, tearing sound of flesh. I scrambled back, heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I peered into the hole, the lantern light revealing nothing but impenetrable darkness. The whispers now formed words, chanting in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow knew in the deepest recesses of my being. They were calling to me, beckoning me to join them in the darkness. Then, something emerged from the hole. It was slow at first, a creeping, slithering movement. Then, with a sickening lurch, a hand reached up, grasping at the edge of the broken floorboards. The hand was skeletal, the flesh rotted and blackened, the fingernails long and yellowed. Another hand followed, then another, clawing, pulling. A face emerged from the darkness, bathed in the flickering lantern light. It was a face I recognized, a face that haunted my dreams. It was the face of the village elder, the one who had whispered the forgotten legends, the one who had warned me about the darkness. But this wasn't the face of a wise old man. This was a mask of horror, the eyes milky white, the skin stretched taut over bone, the lips pulled back in a rictus grin, revealing rows of jagged yellowed teeth. The elder, or what remained of him, pulled himself out of the hole. He stood there, swaying unsteadily, his body a grotesque parody of life. His empty eyes fixed on me, and a low, guttural moan escaped his throat. He took a step towards me, his limbs moving with an unnatural jerkiness. The whispers intensified, urging me forward, urging me to embrace the darkness. I raised my katana, the steel gleaming in the lantern light. "I am the last samurai," I whispered, my voice trembling, "and I will not yield." The elder lurched forward, his rotting hand reaching for me. The whispers chanted, the earth trembled, and the darkness waited. The battle for my soul, for the soul of my forgotten clan, had begun. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 10. The whispers started again the moment I stepped back into the shadowed embrace of the forest. Not the sibilant rustling of leaves, but the whispers of voices, too low to discern individual words, yet undeniably present, clinging to the edges of my hearing like cobwebs. They seemed to emanate from the trees themselves, from the mossy stones underfoot, from the very air I breathed. They spoke of me, of my purpose, of the approaching darkness. I pressed on, the katana strapped tight against my back, its comforting weight a small reassurance against the growing unease. The path, barely visible in the deepening gloom, led deeper into the heart of the forest, towards the crumbling ruins that held the secrets of my clan. Each step felt heavier, each shadow more menacing, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. The shrine, when I finally reached it, was a pathetic husk of its former glory. The once proud wooden structure was now ravaged by time and neglect, the intricate carvings obscured by moss and decay. The torii gate, its vibrant red now faded to a dull, rusty hue, leaned precariously, as if a single touch could bring it crashing down. The stone lanterns that lined the path were fractured, their flames long extinguished, replaced by the flickering shadows cast by the setting sun. A sense of despair, heavier than the oppressive humidity, settled over me. This was it, the last vestige of the Kusanagi clan, reduced to rubble and whispers. I knelt before the shattered remains of the altar, the damp earth cold against my forehead. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, chilling voice that seemed to resonate deep within my bones. The time is near, Kenzo. The shadows stir. The blood must flow. I raised my head, my gaze sweeping over the ruined shrine. Whose blood? I asked, my voice a ragged whisper in the oppressive silence. The voice chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down my spine. The blood of the unworthy, the blood of those who have forgotten. The blood that will awaken the sleeping gods. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, swirling dust and leaves around me, momentarily obscuring my vision. When it subsided, a figure stood before the altar, cloaked in shadows. Its face was hidden by the deep cowl of its garment, but I could feel its gaze, cold and piercing, boring into me. "Who are you?" I demanded, my hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of my katana. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised a hand, its fingers long and skeletal, and pointed towards the forest's edge. A faint, ethereal glow emanated from the direction it indicated. The gateway opens, the figure rasped, its voice like the scraping of stone against stone. "The path is clear. Embrace your destiny, Kenzo. Embrace the shadows." With a chilling finality, the figure dissolved back into the shadows, leaving me alone once more in the decaying shrine. The whispers faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to amplify the pounding of my heart. I hesitated, my hand still gripping the katana. The glow at the forest's edge pulsed, beckoning me forward. What lay beyond? Was it the answer to the whispers that had plagued me for so long? Was it the path to restoring the honor of my clan? Or was it something far more sinister, a trap laid by forces I could barely comprehend? Fear gnawed at me, but it was overshadowed by a deeper, more primal urge. The urge to understand, to fulfill the destiny that had been thrust upon me. The urge to silence the whispers once and for all. With a deep breath, I sheathed my katana and started towards the pulsing light. The forest seemed to close in around me, the shadows deepening, the air growing colder. The whispers returned, softer now, almost soothing, urging me onward, promising power, promising answers. As I reached the edge of the forest, the glow intensified, revealing a shimmering portal, a tear in the fabric of reality. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, radiating a strange, almost hypnotic beauty. I hesitated for a moment, the precipice of the unknown yawning before me. Then, with a sense of grim determination, I stepped through. The world on the other side was unlike anything I had ever seen. The air was thick, with an unnatural luminescence, casting everything in a spectral, ethereal glow. The trees were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The ground was covered in a carpet of strange, bioluminescent moss that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light. And the whispers, they were everywhere, louder than ever, swirling around me, whispering secrets, whispering promises, whispering lies. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I had crossed a threshold, a point of no return. I had entered a realm beyond comprehension, a realm of shadows and whispers, a realm where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. And I was alone, the last samurai of a forgotten clan, adrift in a world that seemed determined to swallow me whole. The whispers intensified, coiling around me like serpents, promising power, promising answers, whispering lies. And in the heart of that alien landscape, I began to wonder if the whispers were right. Was I truly the last samurai? Or was I something else entirely, something more? I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 11. The whispers started subtly, like the rustling of leaves in a non-existent breeze. They snaked around the edges of my hearing, just beyond comprehension. At first, I dismissed them as the wind playing tricks, a phantom sound born from the oppressive silence of the abandoned village. But they persisted, growing more insistent, weaving themselves into the fabric of the night. I sat hunched by the dying embers of the fire, the katana across my lap, its polished surface reflecting the flickering orange light. The darkness beyond the firelight pressed in, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the rhythmic creak of the old well's wooden frame. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into guttural syllables, a language I recognized but couldn't understand. It was the dialect of the forgotten clan, the tongue my ancestors used to commune with the spirits of the mountain. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced the numbness that had settled over me. I gripped the katana tighter, the familiar weight grounding me. The whispers now formed words, fragmented and distorted, yet laced with a malevolent intent. They spoke of shadows and blood, of ancient oaths and broken promises. They spoke of me. Driven by a primal instinct, I rose, my senses on high alert. The whispers seemed to emanate from the well, its dark maw gaping like a gateway to the underworld. I approached it cautiously, each step crunching on the frost-covered ground, the sound amplified in the unnatural silence. The air grew colder, the smell of damp earth and something else, something sickeningly sweet, filling my nostrils. I peered into the well's depths, but saw nothing beyond the impenetrable blackness. The whispers intensified, swirling around me, pressing against my eardrums. I felt a presence, unseen but palpable, watching me from the darkness below. It was a cold, malevolent presence, devoid of any semblance of humanity. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the village, extinguishing the last embers of the fire. I was plunged into absolute darkness, the whispers now deafening, echoing inside my skull. Panic clawed at me, threatening to overwhelm my senses. I stumbled back from the well, my hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of my katana. A low growl rumbled from the well, followed by a sickeningly wet sound. Something was climbing out. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the darkness but saw nothing. Then, a pair of glowing red eyes materialized from the depths of the well, burning like twin embers in the night. The creature emerged slowly, its form gradually taking shape in the darkness. It was humanoid, but twisted and grotesque, its skin a sickly gray stretched taut over protruding bones. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in clawed hands that dripped with a viscous black fluid. Its head was elongated, its face a mask of decaying flesh, its eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence. The whispers ceased, replaced by a low, guttural growl that resonated deep within my chest. It was one of the Yama-uba, the mountain hags, creatures of legend said to prey on lost travelers, luring them to their deaths with whispered promises and sweet lies. My ancestors had fought them for generations, their battles etched into the very stones of this forgotten village. Now I, the last samurai, stood face to face with this ancient evil. The Yama-uba took a step towards me, its long, clawed fingers reaching out. The air crackled with an unseen energy, the smell of decay intensifying. I drew my katana, the polished steel gleaming faintly in the starlight. Fear still gnawed at me, but it was tempered by a cold resolve, a duty to my ancestors, to the forgotten clan. "You will not defile this sacred ground," I growled, my voice surprisingly steady. The Yama-uba hissed, its red eyes burning brighter. It lunged at me, its claws slashing through the air. I parried the attack, the katana singing as it met the creature's claws. The force of the blow sent tremors through my arm, but I held my ground. The battle was joined. I fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, the katana a blur of steel in the darkness. The Yama-uba was fast and agile, its movements unpredictable. Its claws raked across my armor, tearing through the leather and drawing blood. The stench of decay filled my nostrils, choking me. I knew I couldn't win a prolonged fight. The Yama-uba was too strong, too resilient. I had to find a weakness, exploit its vulnerability. As we clashed again, I noticed a flicker of fear in its burning red eyes. It was afraid of the katana, of the sacred steel forged by my ancestors. With a renewed sense of purpose, I pressed my attack, forcing the Yama-uba back towards the well. It hissed and snarled, its claws tearing at my flesh, but I didn't falter. I drove it back, step by agonizing step, until it stood on the edge of the well, its back to the dark abyss. With a roar, I lunged, the katana aimed at its heart. The Yama-uba shrieked, a sound that tore through the night, as the blade pierced its flesh. It stumbled back, its red eyes widening in surprise and terror, and then plunged into the darkness of the well. A sickening splash echoed through the silent village, followed by a low, guttural growl that faded into nothing. I stood on the edge of the well, my chest heaving, my body aching. The silence returned, heavy and oppressive. The whispers were gone. I was alone again, the last samurai, standing guard over the forgotten clan. But I knew, deep in my heart, that this was not the end. The mountain held other secrets, other horrors, waiting to be unleashed. And I, the last samurai, would face them all. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 12. The whispering grew louder. It slithered into my dreams, no longer a murmur, but a chorus of sibilant voices, promising power, promising vengeance, promising oblivion. I awoke in a cold sweat, the tatami mats beneath me damp with it. The brazier in the corner offered little warmth, its embers glowing a sickly orange in the pre-dawn gloom. The katana at my side seemed to vibrate, humming a low, unsettling song. I rose, my joints protesting with every creak. The silence of the old temple, usually a comfort, now pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. The whispering had ceased, replaced by a profound, unsettling quiet. It felt as though the very air held its breath, waiting. My hand, guided by an unseen force, reached for the tarnished bronze mirror on the wall. My reflection stared back, hollow-eyed and gaunt. But it wasn't just my own weariness I saw. Something shifted in the depths of the mirror. A fleeting glimpse of a landscape shrouded in mist, skeletal trees reaching towards a bruised, swirling sky. And then, for just a heartbeat, a face. Not human, not entirely inhuman. A mask of bone and shadow, its eyes burning with an unholy light. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving me trembling. The metallic tang of blood on my tongue. I knew, with chilling certainty, that the whispers were connected to the mirror, to the entity lurking within. It was feeding on my grief, my loneliness, twisting them into something dark and dangerous. I should destroy it, shatter the bronze, and cast the fragments into the sea. But a perverse curiosity, a dangerous flicker of hope, stayed my hand. Could this entity, this thing, hold the key to avenging my clan? Could it grant me the power I craved? The thought, once formed, took root, growing like a poisonous weed in my mind. I spent the day in a daze, practicing kata, the movements mechanical, my heart not in it. The whispers returned, as dusk settled, weaving around me like phantom limbs. They spoke of rituals, of sacrifices, of a path to unimaginable power. A path paved with blood. Oh, that night, I couldn't sleep. The whispering was constant, insidious, burrowing into my mind. I found myself drawn to the mirror again, my hand reaching out as if compelled by an unseen force. My reflection was barely visible in the flickering candlelight, but the eyes, those burning eyes, I could still see them. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, commanding voice. "Embrace the shadows," it hissed. "Embrace the power." It demanded a sacrifice. My gaze fell upon the worn leather pouch hanging from my belt, containing the last of the sacred earth from my clan's ancestral burial ground. I had sworn to protect it, to one day return it to its rightful place when the land was cleansed of the usurpers. But now the whispers promised a different kind of cleansing, a cleansing fire of vengeance. My fingers trembled as I opened the pouch. The earth was cool and dry, smelling faintly of pine and something ancient, something sacred. The whispers urged me on, promising unimaginable power in exchange for this small offering. I closed my eyes, my hand shaking so violently that some of the earth spilled onto the tatami mats. A wave of nausea washed over me. This was madness. I was betraying everything I stood for, everything my clan had fought and died for. But the whispers wouldn't be silenced. They painted vivid images in my mind. The faces of my slaughtered kin, the burning of our village, the triumphant sneer of the warlord who had orchestrated it all. The images twisted and writhed, fueling my rage, drowning out the last vestiges of my conscience. With a choked sob, I sprinkled the sacred earth onto the surface of the mirror. The bronze shimmered, the reflected candlelight distorting into grotesque shapes. The whispering ceased. A silence descended, deeper and more oppressive than any I had experienced before. Then, the mirror began to glow. The light pulsed, growing brighter with each passing moment, until it was unbearable to look at. I shielded my eyes, but I could still feel the heat radiating from it, washing over me like a fever dream. A low hum filled the air, growing in intensity until it felt as though the very foundations of the temple were vibrating. Slowly, cautiously, I lowered my hand. The mirror was now a swirling vortex of light, the bronze surface dissolving into something resembling liquid moonlight. Within the swirling depths, the masked face reappeared, larger now, more defined. It no longer seemed an image reflected on the surface, but a being peering out from another realm. Its eyes, burning with an unholy light, locked onto mine. A voice, cold and ancient, echoed in my mind. "The pact is made, last samurai. Embrace your destiny." Then, the light exploded. I was thrown back, crashing against the wall. The world spun, a kaleidoscope of blinding light and deafening sound. When my vision finally cleared, the mirror was gone. In its place was nothing, just a gaping hole in the wall, revealing the darkness beyond. And the whispering was back. But now, it was different. It was inside me. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan, Part 13. The whispers grew louder, not in volume, but in insistence. They slithered around the edges of my sanity, no longer content to merely brush against it. They spoke of the kusabi, of its hunger, of the blood price it demanded. My hand, wrapped tightly around the hilt of Muramasa, was slick with sweat, though the air in the cave was frigid. The flickering lantern light danced across the cave walls, painting grotesque shadows that shifted and writhed, mimicking the movements of unseen things. I pressed further into the darkness, the rough stones scraping against my worn leather armor. Each echoing drip of water from the cave ceiling was a hammer blow against my resolve. I had followed the tracks of the Oni cloven hoofprints, deeply embedded in the muddy floor, for what felt like an eternity. The trail led deep into the heart of Mount Cage, a place shunned even by the most hardened mountain folk. They called it the Belly of the Beast, whispering tales of demons and vanished souls. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and something else, metallic, almost sweet. The smell of blood, but older, darker, infused with the essence of something ancient and malevolent. The Oni had brought something here, something it valued, something it fed. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a chillingly familiar voice, a voice I had tried to bury beneath years of stoic discipline and rigorous training. It was the voice of my father, warped and twisted by the Kusabi's influence. He spoke of honor, of duty, of the necessity of sacrifice. He spoke of the power that awaited me, the power to avenge our clan, the power to cleanse the land. I stumbled, my knee striking a loose stone. The clatter echoed through the cavern, momentarily silencing the whispers. In the brief respite, I saw it. At the far end of the cave, a faint, pulsating red light emanated from a narrow passage. The source of the whispers, the lair of the Oni, the heart of the mountain's darkness. Drawing a deep, shaky breath, I forced myself forward. The whispers returned, louder than ever, wrapping around me like icy tendrils. They pleaded, they threatened, they promised. They spoke of the Kusabi, no longer as a cursed blade, but as a sacred key, a gateway to untold power. The passage narrowed, forcing me to crawl on my hands and knees. The air became even thicker, the smell of blood almost overpowering. The red glow intensified, bathing the passage in an unsettling crimson light. I could hear the rhythmic thumping of something large, something powerful, something alive. Finally, I reached the end of the passage. I peered into the vast chamber beyond, and the breath caught in my throat. In the center of the chamber, bathed in the crimson glow, was a monstrous, pulsating heart. Veins, thick as tree trunks, snaked across the floor, pulsing with dark, viscous fluid. The air thrummed with an oppressive energy. The very stones seemed to vibrate with the heart's rhythmic beat. And chained to the heart, his flesh flayed and skeletal, his eyes burning with a malevolent green fire, was the Oni. Not a single beast, but a multitude of twisted, demonic forms fused together into a grotesque tapestry of flesh and bone. It thrashed against its chains, its roars echoing through the chamber, a symphony of pain and rage. Around the heart, scattered across the floor, were the remains of its victims, not just animals, but humans, men, women, children, their bones picked clean, their flesh consumed, their souls absorbed into the heart's unholy glow. Among them, I saw a familiar piece of cloth, a fragment of a kimono, the same pattern as the one my sister had worn on the day she disappeared. The whispers reached a fever pitch, a cacophony of voices vying for my attention. My father's voice rose above the din, promising me vengeance, offering me power. He pointed to a pedestal beside the heart, upon which rested the Kusabi, its blade pulsing with the same crimson light as the heart. He urged me to take it, to embrace its power, to become the instrument of the Kusabi's will. My hand trembled as I reached towards the blade. The whispers were almost deafening now, promising me unimaginable power, whispering the secrets of forgotten rituals, promising the resurrection of my clan. I could almost feel the blade's power calling to me, resonating with something dark and hungry within my own soul. The Oni's roars intensified, its multiple eyes fixated on me, burning with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Was this truly the path to vengeance? Was this the destiny of the last samurai? Or was this the final, irreversible step into the abyss, the point of no return where I would become the very monster I had sworn to destroy? The whispers intensified, urging me onward. My fingers brushed against the cold steel of the Kusabi's hilt. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 14. The rain hammered against the crumbling walls of the abandoned temple, a relentless percussion that echoed the drumming in my chest. The tattered scrolls, now spread across the warped wooden floor, seemed to writhe in the flickering candlelight, their cryptic kanji shimmering like trapped insects. The secret they held, the ritual to appease the mountain god, Yama no Oni, was both my salvation and my potential doom. My hands, still stained with the residue of the purification ritual, a mixture of mountain herbs and my own blood, trembled as I traced the archaic symbols. Each stroke felt charged, humming with an unseen power. This ritual, forbidden for generations, was my last hope. The Oni's influence was spreading like a malignant growth through our ancestral lands, twisting the very fabric of reality. The whispers had become screams, the shadows had become tangible, and the scent of decay, once faint, now clung to the air like a shroud. I, Kenji, last samurai of the forgotten Akizuki clan, was the only one left to stand against the darkness. My family, my village, all consumed by the mountain god's insatiable hunger. Their faces, contorted in agony and fear, haunted my waking thoughts and invaded my dreams. The scrolls warned of the ritual's cost. It demanded a sacrifice, a vessel to contain Yamano-Oni's malevolence. And I knew with a chilling certainty who that vessel had to be. I glanced towards the corner of the temple. There, huddled beneath a torn tapestry depicting a serene Buddha, was Hana. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, were now glazed over, her breath shallow and ragged. The Oni's mark, a swirling black brand upon her neck, pulsed with a sickening luminescence. She was fading, slipping away into the god's grasp. The thought of offering her, the only innocent soul left in this blighted land, sent a wave of nausea through me, but the scrolls offered no alternative. To hesitate was to condemn us both, to allow the Oni to consume her entirely and then turn its ravenous gaze towards the rest of the world. I began the chant, the ancient words rasping in my throat. The air crackled with static. The candle flames danced wildly, casting grotesque shadows that stretched and writhed across the temple walls. The rain outside intensified, transforming into a torrential downpour that threatened to tear the fragile structure apart. Hana stirred, a low moan escaping her lips. Her eyes flickered open, focusing on me with a heart-wrenching mixture of fear and recognition. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against mine. "Kenji," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. My heart clenched. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to continue the chant, the words a bitter mantra against the rising tide of despair. The kanji on the scrolls began to glow, their light illuminating the temple with an eerie, otherworldly radiance. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable sense of dread. I could feel the Oni's presence, a suffocating weight pressing down on me, a cold, malevolent gaze boring into my soul. The ground beneath me trembled. Deep within the mountain, something vast and ancient stirred. A low growl, like the rumbling of 1,000 angry demons, echoed through the valley. Hana's grip tightened on my hand. Her eyes, though still clouded, held a spark of understanding. She knew what was coming. She knew what I had to do. The final words of the chant tore from my throat, a desperate plea and a solemn acceptance. The scrolls erupted in a blinding flash of light, the kanji swirling and merging into a single, pulsating symbol. A vortex of swirling darkness opened in the center of the temple, a gateway to the Oni's realm. The stench of decay intensified, overwhelming my senses. The air grew frigid, biting at my skin like shards of ice. Hana's hand went limp in mine. The black mark on her neck flared, then faded, leaving behind only smooth, unblemished skin. Her eyes closed, her breathing even and deep. The Oni's grip had loosened. I lifted her gently, cradling her like a precious porcelain doll. With each step towards the swirling darkness, my heart shattered anew. This was the only way. A sacrifice to save what remained of the world, a final act of defiance against the encroaching darkness. As I stood at the precipice of the void, the wind whipped around me, carrying whispers in a language I didn't understand but felt deep within my bones. They were promises of power, of vengeance, of an end to my suffering, but I knew the truth. The Oni offered only oblivion, a hollow victory built on the ashes of everything I held dear. I closed my eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on my cheek. Then, with a whispered prayer to my ancestors and a final, anguished cry, I stepped into the darkness. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 15. The whispering grew louder as I descended. No longer just a rustling of leaves, it now sounded like a chorus of sibilant voices, just beyond the edge of comprehension. The stone steps, slick with moss, and something darkly viscous, spiraled down into a darkness so complete it felt like a physical presence. The air grew colder, the scent of pine giving way to something metallic, like blood mixed with wet earth. The talisman pulsed erratically against my chest, its warmth the only comfort in this chilling descent. Each step echoed unnaturally, bouncing off unseen walls and returning distorted, as if the very stones were mocking my intrusion. I drew my katana, the familiar weight, a small reassurance in the face of the unknown. The blade, passed down through generations, hummed faintly, vibrating with a power that mirrored the dread coiling in my gut. The spiral seemed endless. I lost track of time, lost track of how many steps I'd taken. The only markers were the increasingly frequent glimpses of movement in the periphery. Flitting shadows that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Were they the source of the whispering? Or were they, like me, drawn to some unseen horror at the heart of this place? Finally, the steps ended. I found myself in a vast cavern, the ceiling lost in the oppressive blackness above. The whispering intensified, pressing against my ears, slithering into my mind. I could almost understand the words, fragments of a language both ancient and alien, speaking of rituals and sacrifice, of a power that slumbered and yearned to awaken. A faint, phosphorescent glow emanated from the center of the cavern. As I approached, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. The glow emanated from a pool of still, black water, its surface reflecting nothing. Around the pool, arranged in a perfect circle, were 13 stone pillars, each carved with grotesque figures, twisted limbs, gaping maws, and eyes that seemed to follow my every move. The whispers reached a crescendo. I felt a cold hand grip my heart, squeezing the breath from my lungs. My vision blurred, and I stumbled, my hand instinctively reaching out to steady myself against one of the pillars. As my fingers brushed the cold stone, a jolt of pure terror surged through me. The carvings weren't just carvings. They were faces. Human faces, contorted in agony, fused into the stone as if they were part of it. I recoiled, nausea rising in my throat. Then I saw it. In the center of the black pool, something moved. A shape, slowly rising from the depths. It was humanoid, but impossibly tall and thin, its limbs elongated and skeletal. Its skin, or what looked like skin, was a sickly gray, stretched taut over bone. Its head was a smooth, featureless dome, save for 2 gaping black holes where eyes should have been. The creature emerged from the water, its movements unnervingly fluid, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, a guttural rasp that seemed to emanate from the creature itself, yet also from the very stones of the cavern. It spoke in the ancient tongue, and although I still couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. It was a greeting, a welcome, an invitation. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the talisman burning against my skin. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this creature was the source of the curse that plagued my clan. This was the entity that demanded sacrifice, the entity that had driven my ancestors to madness and despair. This was the reason for the whispers, the reason for the disappearances, the reason for the blood-soaked earth beneath the shrine. I wanted to run, to flee back up the spiral staircase, to escape the oppressive presence of this thing. But my legs felt like lead, my body refusing to obey my commands. The creature raised a long, skeletal finger, pointing directly at me. The whispering intensified, becoming a deafening roar inside my head. I felt a pull, a magnetic force, drawing me towards the black pool, towards the creature. The talisman pulsed frantically, its light growing brighter, as if struggling against the creature's power. I gripped the katana tighter, the steel a lifeline in the face of overwhelming dread. I knew, with a sinking heart, that this was it. This was the final confrontation. This was the moment I had been preparing for my entire life. I was the last samurai, and I was about to face the demon that had haunted my clan for generations. The creature opened its mouth, and a sound emerged that was not a sound but a feeling, a wave of pure, unadulterated malice that washed over me, threatening to shatter my sanity. The black pool rippled, and something began to rise from its depths, something else, something far worse. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 16. The whispering intensified. It was no longer a rustling of leaves or a sigh of wind, but distinct, sibilant utterances, slithering around me like phantom snakes. They spoke in the ancient tongue of my clan, a dialect so archaic I only understood fragments, enough to chill me to the bone. They spoke of the ritual, of the offering, of the blood moon rising. My hand tightened on the hilt of the Muramasa blade. The rustle of the silk wrapping around it felt strangely comforting against the creeping dread that numbed my limbs. I continued deeper into the forest, the oppressive darkness clinging to me like a shroud. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth, and something else. Something metallic, something sickeningly sweet. The Torii Gate loomed ahead, its vermilion paint peeling like sunburnt skin, a ghastly grin in the gloom. Beyond it, the path led to the hidden shrine, the heart of the forgotten ritual. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee this cursed place and never look back. But the whispers, now laced with a mournful plea, drew me forward, an invisible chain binding my will. I stepped through the gate, the air growing colder, the whispers louder. They swirled around me, a vortex of voices, some pleading, some threatening, some filled with an unbearable sorrow. They spoke of a betrayal, a sacrifice, a curse that had plagued our clan for generations. They spoke of the blood moon, the night when the veil between worlds thinned, and the ancient pact could be renewed. The shrine stood before me, a small wooden structure, its weathered timbers blackened by age and decay. A single flickering lantern cast grotesque shadows that danced and writhed like tormented spirits. The metallic scent intensified, now mingled with the cloying sweetness of decaying flowers. I saw it then, a stain on the worn wooden steps leading to the shrine, dark and glistening. Blood. Fresh blood. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the forest. I drew the Muramasa blade, the steel singing softly as it left the scabbard. The whispers grew louder, closer, pressing against me, trying to burrow into my mind. I fought against their insidious pull, clinging to the last vestiges of my sanity. "Who is there?" I demanded, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper against the cacophony of spectral voices. Silence. Only the rustling of the leaves and the incessant whispers. Then, a movement. A shadow detached itself from the darkness behind the shrine, slowly solidifying into a figure. It was tall and gaunt, clad in the tattered remnants of a samurai's armor, the metal corroded and stained with what looked like dried blood. Its face was hidden behind a No mask, a grotesque caricature of a weeping woman, the painted tears streaking down its porcelain cheeks. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that mask. It was the mask of the mournful maiden, a relic of the forbidden ritual. Legend had it that the maiden was the embodiment of the clan's sorrow, a conduit between the living and the dead. The figure raised a skeletal hand, pointing a bony finger towards the shrine. The whispers intensified, merging into a single, chilling command. The offering, the blood, the pact must be renewed. The ground beneath my feet trembled. The air vibrated with an unseen energy. I felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing me towards the shrine, towards the waiting darkness. I struggled against it, my will a fragile shield against the overwhelming power of the ritual. The figure took a step closer, its empty sockets seeming to bore into my soul. The metallic scent, the sweetness of decay, it was all around me now, suffocating me. I saw then what lay on the steps of the shrine, barely visible in the flickering lantern light. A body. A young woman, clad in a white kimono, her face pale and serene in death. Her chest was stained crimson, a gaping wound marking the spot where her heart had been torn out. The offering. The whispers shrieked in triumph. The figure in the mask reached out, its hand brushing against mine. A jolt of icy energy surged through me, numbing my senses, paralyzing my will. The Muramasa blade slipped from my grasp, clattering on the stone steps. I wanted to scream, to fight, but my body was no longer my own. I was a puppet, controlled by unseen forces, drawn inexorably towards the heart of the ritual. The mournful maiden beckoned me forward, its silent laughter echoing in the depths of my mind. The blood moon hung heavy in the sky, its crimson light bathing the forest in an unholy glow. The pact would be renewed. the curse would continue. And I, the last samurai, would be its instrument. The whispering became a chant, a rhythmic pulse that resonated with the beating of my heart. The world around me blurred, the forest dissolving into a swirling vortex of shadows and blood. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a burning sensation that spread through my veins like wildfire. I looked down, my eyes widening in horror. A dark stain was spreading across my kimono, blossoming like a crimson flower. The last thing I saw before darkness consumed me was the mask of the mournful maiden, its painted tears glistening in the blood moon's light, a silent testament to the eternal sorrow of my forgotten clan. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 17. The whispering intensified. It wasn't just the wind anymore. It was inside the walls, within the very fabric of the dilapidated temple. Voices, fragmented and chilling, spoke in a dialect I hadn't heard since childhood, a dialect of the forgotten. They spoke of shadows and sacrifice, of a hunger that could never be sated. My hand tightened on the hilt of the Muramasa blade, the cool steel a comfort against the rising dread. I moved deeper into the temple's bowels, the air growing thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic like blood long dried. The kanji painted on the walls, once vibrant depictions of our clan's history, were now faded and smeared, as if clawed at by unseen hands. The whispering coalesced into a singular voice, emanating from the deepest part of the temple. It called my name, a mournful wail that resonated through my bones. Kenzo, Kenzo, return what was taken. My heart hammered against my ribs. What had been taken? The Muramasa blade, the honor of my clan, my very life. I knew, deep down, that this voice, this presence, was connected to the Oni mask I carried, the mask that had led me on this terrifying pilgrimage. The corridor opened into a large chamber. Moonlight filtered through a hole in the ceiling, illuminating a circular dais in the center. On the dais sat a stone basin filled with a viscous, black liquid. The stench was overwhelming, a sickening mix of decay and something else, something ancient. The whispering stopped. An oppressive silence descended, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of the black liquid overflowing the basin and pooling on the floor. Then the shadows moved. Not the dancing shadows cast by the moonlight, but the actual darkness itself. It writhed and pulsed, coalescing into humanoid forms that circled the dais. They were like phantoms, insubstantial yet menacing, their presence radiating an icy chill. "Kenzo," the voice whispered again, this time closer, directly behind me. I spun around, the Muramasa blade singing as I drew it, but there was nothing there. Just shadows, just the whispering. "The Oni demands its due," the voice hissed. My gaze fell to the Oni mask hanging from my belt. It felt heavier now, pulsating with a malevolent energy. I understood. The Oni mask wasn't a relic of my clan. It was a key to something terrible. Slowly, I approached the dais. The black liquid pulsed and bubbled, as if alive. The phantom figures surrounding it bowed their heads, their movements jerky and unnatural. I looked into the basin. The black liquid reflected my face, distorted and grotesque, but it wasn't just my reflection I saw. Behind my image, another face emerged, monstrous and horned, its eyes burning with a malevolent fire. The face of the Oni. The voice in my head grew stronger, demanding, urging me to what? To join it? To become it? "Offer the blade," the voice commanded. My hand trembled. The Muramasa blade was my family's legacy, the last vestige of our honor. To surrender it felt like surrendering my very soul. But the pressure was immense. The whispers intensified. The phantom figures closed in, their shadowy hands reaching, grasping. The Oni's face in the reflection grinned, its fangs bared. I closed my eyes, fighting against the overwhelming compulsion. I thought of my ancestors, of their sacrifices, of the honor they had entrusted to me. Could I betray them? Could I succumb to this evil? "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the cacophony in my head. The shadows shrieked. The Oni roared in frustration. The black liquid in the basin erupted, spraying me with its foulness. I stumbled back. The Muramasa blade held out defensively. The phantom figures attacked, their shadowy claws tearing at my clothes, their touch like ice. I fought back. The blade, a whirlwind of steel, cutting through the shadows, dispersing them momentarily. But they reformed, relentless, their numbers growing. I was tiring, my strength waning. The Oni's voice, now a deafening roar, filled my mind, promising power, promising release, if only I would surrender the blade. I knew I couldn't hold out much longer. The temple, the Oni, the shadows, they were too powerful. As I parried another attack, my eyes fell on something behind the dais, a small, wooden chest, almost hidden in the shadows. Could it be the answer? A way out? I had to try. I had to find out. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan, Part 18. The whispers started subtly, like the rustling of silk in an empty room. At first, I dismissed them as the wind teasing the dilapidated shoji screens of the abandoned village. But the wind wasn't whispering my name. Kenzo, it hissed, a sibilant caress laced with ice. The Onmyoji's warning echoed in my mind. Asterisk, they hunger for the blood of your lineage. They yearn for the power it holds. My hand instinctively went to the katana strapped to my back. The cold steel a small comfort against the creeping dread. The village, bathed in the ethereal glow of the rising moon, looked different. The dilapidated huts seemed to lean in, their shadows stretching like grasping claws. The once comforting silence was now oppressive, pregnant with an unseen menace. I pressed on, deeper into the heart of the forsaken village, towards the crumbling shrine where I hoped to find answers, some clue to the ritual the Onmyoji had spoken of. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a vortex of malice. They spoke of forgotten atrocities, of sacrifices made to appease ancient nameless gods. They spoke of my ancestors, their power, their demise. The air grew heavy, thick with a cloying sweetness that made me gag. It smelled of decay, of something ancient and profane. The ground beneath my feet became soft, spongy. I looked down and saw that I was walking on a carpet of withered crimson blossoms, the same blossoms I had seen clutching the skeletal remains of the villagers. "Kenzo, join us," the whispers pleaded, their tone shifting from malevolent whispers to mournful pleas. "Embrace the power, become one with us." I drew my katana, the polished steel glinting in the moonlight. The blade hummed, a low, resonant vibration that mirrored the growing unease in my gut. The shrine loomed before me, a skeletal structure of rotting wood and crumbling stone. Its torii gate, once a vibrant vermilion, was now a bleached, skeletal frame, draped with the same crimson blossoms. The air here was even thicker, the sweet, putrid smell almost unbearable. As I approached the shrine, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, deep and resonant, emanating from within the structure. "You cannot escape your destiny, Kenzo," it boomed. "The blood of your ancestors calls to you. The power awaits." I hesitated at the threshold, my hand tightening on the hilt of my katana. Fear warred with a strange, unsettling curiosity. What awaited me inside? Was it the power the Onmyoji had spoken of, or was it something far more sinister? Steeling myself, I stepped across the threshold. The interior of the shrine was shrouded in darkness, the only light filtering through the gaps in the decaying roof. The air was stagnant, heavy with the scent of incense and something else, something metallic like blood. My eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom. In the center of the shrine, I saw it. An altar, crafted from blackened stone, stained with what looked like centuries of dried blood. Upon the altar lay a single object, a tarnished, ornate dagger. Its blade pulsed with a faint, crimson light. The voice spoke again, closer now, whispering directly into my ear. "The blade of shadows. It thirsts for the blood of the last samurai." I felt a pull towards the dagger, an almost irresistible urge to pick it up, to feel its power coursing through my veins. The whispers intensified, urging me on, promising unimaginable power, promising an end to my loneliness. I took a step forward, then another. My hand reached out, trembling towards the dagger. Suddenly, a vision flashed before my eyes. I saw myself, bathed in blood, the blade of shadows clutched in my hand. I saw the village burning, the screams of the innocent echoing in the night. I saw myself transformed, twisted into something monstrous, something inhuman. The vision snapped me back to reality. I recoiled from the altar, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't power, this was damnation. The voice roared in frustration, the whispers turning into a chorus of angry hisses. The ground began to tremble, the walls of the shrine groaning under some unseen pressure. "You dare defy us?" the voice thundered. "You dare reject your destiny?" I raised my katana, its blade reflecting the faint, crimson light emanating from the blade of shadows. "My destiny is my own," I declared, my voice shaking but resolute. "I will not be a pawn in your twisted game." The darkness within the shrine shifted, coalescing into a swirling mass of shadows. The whispers turned into snarls, into guttural growls. From the depths of the shadows, two crimson eyes ignited, burning with an unholy light. The hunt had begun. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan, Part 19. The whispering had intensified. It was no longer a distant murmur on the wind, but a constant presence, like insects crawling just beneath my skin. The air in the abandoned temple, once still and heavy with the scent of incense and decay, now thrummed with an unnatural energy. The kanji I'd carved into the wooden pillars seemed to writhe, their strokes thickening and thinning like pulsing veins. The sword, the Muramasa blade, thrummed in response, its hilt vibrating against my palm. It was a cold, alien vibration, not the comforting weight I'd grown accustomed to. It felt eager. I knelt before the altar, the shattered remnants of the Oni mask scattered at my feet. I hadn't slept since the confrontation. My eyes, bloodshot and stinging, darted across the shadowed corners of the temple, searching for the source of the whispers, the source of the growing dread that coiled in my gut. They wanted the mask. That much was clear, but not just asterisk of mask, this of mask. The one that had been passed down through my lineage, a vessel for something ancient and malevolent. I tried to piece together the fragmented memories that had surfaced after donning the mask, flashes of writhing shadows, chanting voices, the chilling sensation of something vast and inhuman pressing against my mind. It was like trying to grasp smoke. The more I strained, the less I seemed to hold. A flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. I whirled around, Muramasa held high. Nothing, just the dancing shadows cast by the flickering oil lamps. "Show yourselves!" I roared, my voice raw. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single word, repeated over and over, asterisk, kintsugi, 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 kintsugi. The art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making the flaws part of the beauty. What did it mean? What did they want me to mend? My gaze fell upon the shattered mask. Was that it? Did they want me to restore the vessel, to unleash whatever entity was trapped within? A cold wave of terror washed over me. I knew, instinctively, that restoring the mask would be a catastrophic mistake. Yet, the whispers, laced with an almost hypnotic allure, seemed to weave their way into my thoughts, whispering promises of power, of understanding, of finally knowing the truth behind my clan's forgotten history. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and picked up a shard of the mask. It was smooth and cold against my skin, and as I held it, the whispers intensified, morphing into a cacophony of voices, all chanting the same word, asterisk, kintsugi. I closed my eyes, battling the growing compulsion. I had to resist. I had to find another way. Suddenly, a guttural growl echoed from the shadows behind the altar. I spun around, Muramasa raised, my heart pounding against my ribs. A hulking shape emerged from the darkness. It was humanoid, but twisted and grotesque, its skin a sickly green, its limbs elongated and contorted. Its eyes glowed with an unholy light, and its mouth was a gaping maw filled with needle-sharp teeth. Another Oni. But this one was different, larger, more powerful, and radiating an aura of pure, unadulterated malice. It took a step towards me, the floorboards groaning beneath its weight. The air crackled with a palpable sense of dread. I gripped Muramasa tighter, my knuckles white. This wasn't one of the mindless beasts I had encountered before. This one felt intelligent, purposeful. The whispers ceased. The Oni stopped a few feet away, its glowing eyes fixed on the shattered mask in my hand. It extended a clawed hand, its gesture almost imploring. "Kintsugi," it rasped, its voice a grating sound that seemed to claw at my sanity. I understood then. They hadn't sent the mindless Oni to retrieve the mask. They had sent this emissary. to ensure I fulfilled their wishes. I looked down at the shard in my hand, then back at the creature before me. The choice was clear. Either I restore the mask and unleash whatever horrors lay dormant within, or I face this monstrous creature, knowing full well I might not survive. A third option flickered in my mind. Desperate and reckless, I could try to use the Oni's desire for the mask against it, buy myself some time. With a deep breath, I raised the shard. "You want this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The Oni nodded, its glowing eyes never leaving the shard. "Then come and get it." I tossed the shard into the darkest corner of the temple. The Oni lunged, a guttural roar ripping from its throat. It disappeared into the shadows, its movement swift and unsettling. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran. I knew this was just a temporary reprieve. They would find the shard. They would come for me again. But for now, I had a sliver of hope. A chance to find answers. A chance to understand the true nature of the curse that plagued my clan. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to break it. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 20. The silence in the abandoned village pressed down on me, heavier than the rain-soaked straw cloak I wore. The smoke from the offering pyre I'd built for Kenji, my last remaining student, still clung to the air, a bitter perfume of loss. I had expected the Oni, the demons we had sworn to fight, to appear, gloating, feasting on the despair. But they remained hidden, a coiled threat in the shadows. Their absence was more unsettling than their presence would have been. The scroll, the one Kenji had died protecting, was clutched in my hand, its aged parchment rough against my skin. It contained the final verses of the banishment ritual, the only weapon we had against the Oni's creeping influence. Kenji's death had not been in vain. He had bought me the time I needed. But the cost was carved into my soul deeper than any blade. I found a dilapidated hut, its roof sagging under the weight of the incessant rain. The interior was dark and damp, smelling of mildew and something faintly metallic. I lit a small fire, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the rotted wood. The scroll lay open before me, the kanji characters swimming in the dim light. The ritual was complex, requiring ingredients gathered from sacred grounds scattered across the mountain, grounds now tainted by the Oni. I had to complete it, for Kenji, for the clan, for the memory of a life that felt like a fading dream. As the fire crackled, I noticed the metallic scent grew stronger. It was the smell of blood, old and dried. I rose, my katana whispering from its scabbard, and examined the floor. Under a layer of dust and grime, I saw it. A dark stain, almost black, spreading across the wooden planks. It was shaped vaguely like a hand, fingers outstretched as if reaching, grasping. A chill crawled up my spine. This wasn't the blood of a boar or a deer. This was different. I knelt, my hand hovering over the stain. A faint whisper reached my ears, carried on the draft that snaked through the gaps in the walls. It sounded like a child's cry, distorted and filled with an unbearable sorrow. I retreated from the stain as if it were fire. This hut, it wasn't just abandoned. It was desecrated. The Oni had been here, not just passing through, but lingering, performing their dark rituals. The thought made my stomach churn. The rain outside intensified, pounding on the roof like a frantic drummer. The wind howled, a mournful cry that echoed the whisper I'd heard. I glanced at the scroll again, the kanji now seeming to writhe and shift before my eyes. Doubt gnawed at me. Was I truly strong enough? Could I face the Oni alone, knowing that every step I took was paved with the sacrifices of my clan? Suddenly, the wind shrieked, and the door of the hut burst open. I spun, my katana raised, expecting to see the grotesque, horned visages of the Oni. But it was something else. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, draped in a dark cloak, the rain streaming from its edges. It was tall and thin, almost skeletal, and its head was bowed. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice tight with apprehension. The figure slowly raised its head. The hood fell back, revealing a face, or what was left of one. The skin was stretched tight over bone, the eyes hollow and dark, the lips pulled back in a gruesome rictus. It was a woman, or what had once been a woman. Her body was ravaged, scarred, as if she had been subjected to unimaginable tortures. But the most disturbing thing was the mark on her forehead, a brand that pulsed with a sickly green light. It was the mark of the Oni. She raised a hand, her fingers gnarled and twisted, and pointed a single, accusing finger at me. A raspy voice, barely a whisper, escaped her lips. You are the last. My grip tightened on my katana. The last samurai. I finished, my voice low and steady. And you? Her lips curled into a horrifying smile, revealing teeth that were filed to sharp points. I was the first, she hissed and lunged at me. Her speed was startling. I barely managed to parry her attack, the force of the blow vibrating through my arms. She fought with a feral intensity, her movements jerky and unpredictable. It wasn't the disciplined combat of a trained warrior, but the desperate, frenzied attack of a cornered animal. I realized then that she wasn't trying to kill me. She was trying to infect me, to spread the taint of the Oni. Each scratch, each bite, was a potential conduit for their corruption. I had to be careful. I had to end this quickly. The fight raged within the confines of the small hut, the air thick with the smell of blood and decay. The woman's strength was unnatural, fueled by something dark and malevolent. She pressed her attack, forcing me back, her hollow eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. I could feel the darkness closing in, the whispers growing louder, the Oni's influence seeping into the very air I breathed. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this fight was not just for my survival. It was for the very soul of my clan. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 21. The whispers intensified as I descended. Each step down the spiraling staircase seemed to drag me further into the earth, closer to the source of the unsettling sound, a low, guttural humming that vibrated in my bones. The air grew thick and cloying, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something sickly sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot. The torch I carried flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the slick stone walls. Engravings more disturbing than any I'd seen before leered at me from the darkness, twisted figures with elongated limbs, their faces blank and eyeless, their mouths stretched in silent screams. The staircase seemed to go on forever. The rhythmic drip of water, the only other sound besides the humming and my own ragged breathing, became a maddening percussion echoing in the confined space. I gripped the katana tighter, the cold steel, a small comfort against the growing dread that coiled in my stomach. Finally, the staircase ended in a vast cavern. The air here was even heavier, the sweet smell, almost overpowering. My torch sputtered, threatening to die, but in its flickering light I saw it, a pulsating, fleshy mass in the center of the cavern. It was enormous, dominating the space, its surface covered in a network of veins that pulsed with a sickly green light. The humming emanated from this thing. Around it, arranged in a perfect circle, were the missing villagers. They stood motionless, their faces pale and vacant, their eyes wide and unseeing, fixed on the pulsating mass. They were not dead, not in the traditional sense. They breathed, shallowly, their chests rising and falling in a slow, unsettling rhythm. But they were empty, husks, their life force seemingly drained. The whispers intensified, swirling around me, coalescing into words, fragmented and horrifying. Join us, become one, the embrace, eternal. I wanted to scream, to run, to turn back and climb the endless stairs, but I was rooted to the spot, my gaze fixed on the monstrous thing in the center of the cavern. A morbid curiosity, a horrifying fascination held me captive. I cautiously approached the circle of villagers, my katana held before me. As I drew closer, I noticed thin, almost translucent tendrils extending from the pulsating mass, connecting to the villagers' chests, just above their hearts. These tendrils pulsed with the same sickly green light as the central mass, and I realized with a sickening lurch that they were conduits, draining the life force from the villagers, feeding the monstrous thing. I reached out and touched one of the tendrils. It felt surprisingly solid, despite its translucent appearance. A jolt of energy, cold and alien, surged through my arm, causing me to recoil in disgust. The whispers intensified again, urging me closer, promising power, eternal life. No, I rasped, my voice hoarse. This is not life. This is an abomination. I raised my katana, the polished steel gleaming in the torchlight. With a guttural cry, I slashed at one of the tendrils. It severed with a sickening squelch, releasing a puff of green gas that smelled of decay and despair. The villager connected to the tendril twitched, a flicker of awareness returning to his eyes. He looked at me, confusion and terror warring on his face. Then, the humming intensified, the pulsating mass throbbing with renewed vigor. The other tendrils pulsed brighter, and the villagers' vacant eyes turned towards me, filled with a malevolent gleam. They began to move, slowly at first, then faster, their limbs stiff and unnatural. They were coming for me. I knew I couldn't fight them all. There were too many. But I also knew I couldn't just stand there and let this thing consume them, consume me. I had to destroy it. I charged towards the pulsating mass, dodging the reaching hands of the villagers. The whispers reached a fever pitch, a cacophony of voices promising power and oblivion. I ignored them, focused on my goal. I had to reach the heart of this monstrosity, the source of its power. The closer I got, the stronger the repulsive smell became, the more intense the humming. The pulsating mass seemed to grow larger, its surface writhing and shifting. I could see now that it wasn't just flesh, but something else, something alien. Gleaming chitinous plates shimmered beneath the network of veins, and I saw glimpses of what looked like eyes, dozens of them, blinking open and closed in the pulsating flesh. I reached the base of the monstrous thing my katana raised. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. This was it. This was the final stand. The last samurai against the ancient evil. And even if I failed, I would take this abomination down with me. With a roar, I plunged my katana deep into the pulsating heart of the monster. I was the last samurai of a forgotten clan. Part 22.